Hi everyone, welcome to a brand new episode of the Genre Equality Podcast on the Genre Equality channel. I'm Hidzir.
I'm Isa.
On episode 48, we got lots to talk about here.
Hmm.
Particularly an anime heavy episode
Yep.
because not only will Isa's anime corner be returning with a bunch of new shows, returning anime, and some standouts that he picked out. Um, in quick hits, I will also be covering three different animes, including two films.
Yep.
One of them is an indie one from Mamoru Hosoda called
Hmm.
Belle,
Hmm.
which is a very unique take on Beauty and the Beast, as well as My Hero Academia World Heroes Mission, which also was recently released in Singapore at Golden Village and Cathay.
Hmm.
So, lots of anime to talk about. Our main topic, though, is obviously, the Marvel Cinematic Universe,
Of course.
where we have very, divided opinions on big franchise titles, which, The Eternals is the main one, as you mentioned.
Yep.
But the new Ghostbusters film called Afterlife is now out,
Hmm.
which I didn't like at all. Cowboy Bebop, the live action adaptation of of a very legendary anime is also out, which
Hmm.
we didn't like.
Hmm.
So there's a lot of big franchise titles that we want to express our disappointment in,
Yep.
as well as some spotlights for some of the film fest indies that are out because of the various film festivals, including shout out to Singapore International Film Festival, which is still going on right now.
Hmm.
I'll be covering Last Night in Soho, Titane, which won the Palme d'Or at the Cannes International Film Festival, Saloum, Lamb, plus we have big uh, Netflix titles that
Yeah.
are that's getting a lot of prominence. Like Hellbound from South Korea,
Mm.
which is starting to be a minor hit. I mean, not quite Squid Game level, but getting there.
Yeah.
Plus we got the new season of Big Mouth. We got a new Miller World animation called Super Crooks, and lots more, man. I mean, we can't wait to delve into all of this, and we don't really have much time because we have so much to cover.
Yeah.
So let's just kick it off with the Eternals, man. Marvel's latest Phase 4 film, directed by 2021 Oscar winner Chloe Zhao. Maybe its most, I guess, visually naturalistic and majestic film yet, in terms of scope.
Yep.
How well does it execute those ambitions? Well, that's what we're here to talk about. I mean, what and who are the Eternals? The film follows the titular group of immortal beings who were sent to Earth in 5000 BC by a group of all powerful, godlike cosmic entities known as the Celestials. And they were the first life forms created in the universe. The Eternals are tasked to defend Earth from the Deviants. What are Deviants? They are
Mhm.
monstrous aliens that mindlessly devour anything in its path. They are led by the wise Ajax, played by Samuel Hayek. They also include the compassionate but naive Cersei, played by Gemma Chan, the group's pseudo Superman member Icarus, played by Richard Madden,
Mm.
the aggressive warrior Fina, played by Angelina Jolie, and a Bollywood star named Kingo, played by Kumio Nanjiani. Filling out the rest of the group is the ever youthful Sprite, played by Leah McHugh, who has the power to create illusions. There's also Fastos, played by Paperboy, Brian Tyree Henry,
Yeah.
who is an inventor. There is Makari, played by Lauren Ridloff, who is a deaf speedster, and Gilgamesh, played by Don Lee from Train to Busan, who is the strongest and kindest of the group. And finally, there is Druig, played by Barry Keoghan, who has the
Mm.
ability to manipulate the minds of others. So, as I mentioned, the group arrived in Earth in the prehistoric era 7,000 years ago to eliminate the Deviants, a mission that they supposedly succeeded in centuries ago. As they wait to return home to their home planet of Olympia, they are told not to interfere in human conflict, but are free to live normal lives in the meantime.
Mhm.
That is until a group of deviants reappear, mutated deviants that are very different from the ones they fought, and a dark secret about the true goals of the Celestials makes the group rethink their mission. Now, with its epic historical scope and more thoughtful humanist themes, it is certainly the most, I guess, intellectually unique Marvel movie from Kevin Feige's canon so far.
Mhm.
That combined with Chloe Zhao's naturalistic visual palette, her on-location shooting, and so forth, Eternals is very different from the usual Marvel film indeed. The question is, did all those elements go here? What do you think about it?
Oh man. Uh, it's no secret that we're big fans of Chloe Zhao, right? We've
Hmm.
already, covered Nomad. What was the other one that we covered recently?
A variety.
Rider as well, and I think whenever we get to the situation whereby one of our favorite kind of indie filmmakers goes together with like the monstrosity that is the Marvel Cinematic Universe, there's a bit of nervousness there.
Mm.
Um, uh, the Marvel model works, right?
Hmm.
They have made billions of dollars over the what are we at now? 30 films or something along those lines.
And a bunch of shows too. Yeah.
And a bunch of shows too. Incredibly popular, makes them a lot of money. And I would like to applaud them for the fact that they're taking kind of risks in terms of the directors that they choose. Unfortunately, I think for Eternals, that was a marriage that didn't quite work out, right?
Mm.
There are moments in time where I think it's very clear what Zhao is trying to do, but she feels hampered, right, by the formulaic necessities of being within this cinematic universe.
Yeah.
Eternals could have been vastly different from any kind of Marvel movie that we've ever gotten had
Hmm.
those restrictions been lifted, and I think it would have been a far better product. But being pulled in two directions in that way, it ultimately becomes a compromise that falls very flat. That
Yeah.
is not to say that there aren't great things there. I do think that the fight scenes were fascinating and pretty good. If anything, this might have been the best Justice League fight I've
Hmm.
ever seen on screen.
Yep.
Outside of a few like gems that we get from the DC animated universe,
Yeah.
for sure. But yeah, outside of that, like it doesn't seem consequential, right?
Hmm.
This entire story, and they've made so much pains on the onset, non-interference. It's kind of in the background. Nobody really knows about us. There's no From the onset, they try to set up the fact that there should be no greater impact of the Eternals on the mainline Marvel continuity.
Yeah.
As far as we can tell at the beginning of the movie. At the end of the movie, it still kind of feels that way, right?
Mm.
Again, they haven't really tied everything up. I'm sure they will talk about it in the future movies to come. Wong will come in and explain everything for us,
Yeah.
and how that ties it up, which I'm okay with. But generally speaking, like this feels a lot like a setup movie,
Yeah.
which is unfortunate because like Chloe Zhao is such a talented storyteller, and I think she
Mm.
got stuck with the short end of the stick in
Mm.
this particular case for the Eternals.
Yeah, yeah. I think the film is at its best in its quieter moments, which is where Chloe Zhao always shines. But
Yeah.
in themes of the cosmic and historical scope of the film, it feels too flimsy and its reach exceeds its grasp.
Hmm.
And when the CGI spectacle action inevitably comes about, that's where the film abandons its uniqueness for the typical cookie cutter MCU formula.
Yeah.
And this is clearly a case of where a director's strengths don't match the studio's house style.
Hmm.
Zhao's ability, the thought and care that she puts into character work and poetic humanism feels restrained in the same way that, Ang Lee was in his
Yeah.
Hulk film. So overall, I'm giving this a 6 out of 10. What about you?
Yeah, I'm gonna give it 6 out of 10. Like it's not a bad Marvel movie, right? Like we have a definitive bad Marvel movie, right?
Yeah, Thor: The Dark World,
That
Iron
we're
Man
looking. Yeah,
2.
we're looking at you. Yeah, these two culprits specifically.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, it's not a bad movie, but like a lot of stuff that has came out this year from Marvel, outside of the
Hmm.
TV shows, the movies have been meh.
Yeah, pretty
Uh,
mediocre. Hopefully they fix that next month, but yeah.
yeah, so we will see kind of how that goes. Like it does feel a lot of like feeder movies of like
Hmm.
no real consequence.
Yep.
And I don't know what it is about Phase 4 necessarily that we are having this kind of like downtime, right? It's not like, in its heyday where we have hit after hit after hit all the way going all the way to Endgame.
Mm.
Just trying to like keep that momentum. So uh the TV shows have been doing great, right? I'm really excited to see what else we get from that because those feel like meaty and consequential, and they're taking like huge risk, swinging really hard, and just going for it and kind of knocking it out of the park.
Yeah,
Uh, Yeah.
if anything, Eternals would have succeeded more as a TV show, as we kind of talked about
Hmm.
offline,
Yeah. Yeah.
whereas the Falcon and the Winter Soldier probably could have benefited from the brevity of a film.
Agreed.
So yeah, perhaps they could have switched around some of the titles from TV to movies, but I think Phase 4 is essentially another Phase 1, which is
Oh.
why we are getting so many setups again, lah.
Yeah.
And why we are not getting the climactic, movies of Phase 3.
Mm.
So in that way, I can kind of give it a pass because they're clearly setting something up,
Yeah.
and they haven't quite failed in that respect yet. So
Yeah.
I'm gonna give it a wait and see approach. Like Phase 4's films haven't turned me off Marvel so much as it
Hmm.
has maybe turn my anticipation to lukewarm lah for their future titles.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, it's a 6 out of 10. A fairly meh film. Next up, let's talk about Last Night in Soho, which is now out in Singapore cinemas,
Hmm.
everywhere as well as on VOD. This is Edgar Wright's latest film, which can be summed up as a time travel ghost story about the danger of losing yourself in nostalgia and the big city.
Kind
Um,
of. Yeah. Hmm.
Last Night in Soho, it follows Eloise, played by Thomasin McKenzie, who is a shy country mouse of a girl and an aspiring fashion designer who moves out to London for college. Not only is she not ready for the bustle and the predators in the big city, she also happens to be able to see ghosts. Once she arrives, she has trouble fitting in until one night in her sleep, she is mysteriously transported to the 1960s in the body of a dazzling wannabe singer named Sandy, played by Anya Taylor-Joy. At first, the glamour and the confidence of being Sandy allows her to find confidence in herself in the real world.
Hmm.
But soon she realizes that the glamour is not all it appears to be, and the dreams of the past start to crack and splinter into something far darker. Big cities are full of predators and entrenched systems that eat up young girls like her, and this is where she's plunged into the demeaning world of exploitative sex work in the form of Sandy.
Hmm.
Now, Last Night in Soho is half of a great movie,
Oh yeah.
and half of that work is extraordinary. Like,
Hmm.
right is a craftsman behind the camera and in the editing room.
Oh yeah.
And visually, the film is something to behold. It's a crazy kaleidoscopic um, film of bright colors and dark corners and David Lynch style set pieces and musical sequences that sweep you up. But in these instances, the story's supernatural meets psychological thriller elements work at its best.
Mhm.
But the film stumbles halfway through with plot threads that don't capitalize on its themes and falters under, one of the dumbest third act twists in
Oh
recent
god.
cinematic history.
Yeah.
There's a lot of style and artistry on display here, but I think Mackenzie and Taylor Joy's performances are somewhat wasted on flimsy character work and a story that doesn't know how to cohere its more intriguing elements. What do you think?
Oh man. It is quite literally half of a great movie.
Yep.
There
The
is
one
a
hour mark, right? The
yeah,
1 hour mark, exactly.
there's
Yeah.
a definitive point where you can see it turn to shit. And
Yeah.
it is so tragic because it's such a beautiful movie. The music is great, as with almost every Edgar Wright movie.
Mhm.
Cinematography is fantastic. Costumes are on point. Set design is on point. Premise is contrived, but interesting for the large
Mhm.
part.
Yeah.
The performances, honestly, I mean, I love Anya Taylor Joy. Made no secret about that. I think she acted her heart out, right, as far
Mhm.
as like Sandy going, but there just wasn't enough given to her to kind of like really shine, right? Same goes for Mackenzie.
Mhm.
Who's I think her wide-eyed like countryside girl thing makes a lot of sense. Very similar to her other work. Um, but when it gets frantic, when the horror kicks in, right, she's no scream queen.
Mhm.
And I think that's also like kind of unfortunate in its own way. I
Yep.
have so many issues with this story, and I think like a lot of it has to do with the fact that while Wright establishes this amazing kind of flourishes to draw these like symbolic things, like the mirror work is insane and
Mhm.
incredibly inventive and oftentimes like pure genius, but there are no set rules for this story, right? In terms of like what exactly does it mean for her to like travel back into the past? What are the rules for that? What are the rules for the supernatural here? Like there is no everything seems arbitrary and
Mm-hmm.
follows a kind of dream logic that unfortunately bleeds into the real world in an extremely unsatisfying way.
Mm.
Um, and yeah, so like it's such a waste. It is such a waste because there could have been some very, very powerful storytelling, some very powerful like thematic exploration that could have gone on. I think Matt Smith as a slime ball is a phenomenal idea that we never get to really see. Right,
Mm-hmm.
he's more conceptual than he is character, which
Mm.
is also unfortunate. I don't know. I really don't know what it is that you could possibly do to fix it. Past the
Mm.
1 hour mark, it feels already like it's too late, like something has gone wrong and there's no way to kind of fix what could have potentially been a great movie.
Yep,
Um,
indeed.
Definitely not one of Wright's best works, for sure. But I mean, I think it's worth a watch just for the visual spectacle if you
Mm.
can put up with the frustration of seeing it till its end.
Yeah, 100% agree. I think it's almost worth seeing Last Night in Soho for the glorious heights of
Oh
the
yeah.
first hour, as Wright, manipulates the visuals and acts like, a master magician in developing this illusion.
Hmm.
It's when that illusion evaporates in the second hour, where it turns into, just right homaging giallo horror in a very, like, obvious and very, like, unsubtle way,
Hmm.
where that illusion evaporates and the movie disappoints. I think Wright in his last two films, which are the only two films, like Baby Driver and Here,
Yeah.
it is where you're starting to see Edgar Wright a bit. The cracks are starting to show in what Edgar Wright is as a filmmaker. I
Yeah.
think the key is that all his films prior to Baby Driver and Last Night in Soho have been written by Simon Pegg,
Mm.
and Wright is more of a visual craftsman than a storyteller. So he is one half of a duo that works spectacularly, and in the films where it's just Edgar Wright, it's just visually spectacular and just a lot of great editing, a lot of great music, a lot of great visuals, but the story just doesn't work.
Yeah.
And I think that's what you're starting to see. Like it's the Simon Peggless Edgar Wright that doesn't work, and I think that's the issue. That's why I'm giving this film a 5 out of 10.
Yeah, it's a 5 out of 10 for me. Like strictly middle of the line because it's half a
Hmm.
movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Now I'm going to quickly delve into the first part of Quick Hits, where I'll be mostly talking about some of the film festival favorites of mine that have come
Hmm.
out in recent months. The first one I'm going to be talking about is Titane, which is this year's Palme d'Or winner at the Cannes Film Festival,
Ooh.
which was historic because its director, Julia Ducournau, is only the second ever woman to win the prize. You may remember Ducournau from her 2016 cannibal horror film Raw. To say that her new film Titane is grosser and gnarlier and weirder than a cannibal movie would be an understatement.
Mhm.
I don't even really know where to start, but I'm just gonna start with the premise lah. It is an ultra fucked up, super queasy body horror extravaganza about a serial killer. This serial killer, as a child, she was in a car accident, so most of her skull and bones have been reconstructed with titanium.
Mhm.
Hence the title Titane. She's a bit of a Wolverine in that sense. More than she enjoys killing people, she enjoys having sex with cars. Yeah, you heard me right. Like she likes to have sex with cars. Somehow one day, she discovers in the middle of a killing spree that she is pregnant with a child of a car, and motor oil,
Wow.
yeah, like motor oil starts pouring from her mouth and breasts and vagina, and she tries a DIY abortion by stabbing herself in the pussy. And let me tell you, stuff like that is like the least of the body horror. To make things worse, the police are after her, and she goes into hiding by moving in with a firefighter. And how does she do this? She does this by impersonating the firefighter's dead son, who the film implies that she killed.
Oh, good
So
God.
she killed this kid, pretends to be him, moves in with her dad. It's also implied, that she killed the firefighter's son. So like I said, like super fucked up, However, as deranged and gruesome as this film is, it is physically and psychologically gruesome. The
Mhm.
film actually, like halfway through, turns bizarrely sweet, That's because the firefighter and the serial killer actually do form a strange kind of bond. The closer they get, the more the serial killer tries to hide her gender, which gets more difficult because her stomach, is getting bigger and her boobs are getting swollen because she's pregnant with a car. There are many scenes of her wrapping herself, up in duct tape, trying to hide a figure that is just as painful to watch as anything in Raw. Those scenes of like the twisted, squeezed flesh are more discomforting or disconcerting than even her killings are. Whatever you're willing to take from it, there's no denying that Titane is the work of a demented visionary in full command of her wild mind.
Mhm.
The movie is like David Cronenberg meets Gaspar Noir. It's gross and violent and traumatic and erotic and pitiless, but it's also a touching and tender modern fable about a weird bond between a parent desperate to believe that his son is alive and a girl relieved to find someone who will love her. Titan is visceral and hard to watch. It's just like this cornucopia of disturbing imagery that will stick with you. But I think despite your disgust, Dukanau's command of camera and emotional storytelling will compel you to never look away. I'm giving this a 7.5 out of 10.
Wow.
Next up, let's move on to something I just saw last night at the Singapore International Film Festival. It's called Saloum. It's directed by Congolese filmmaker Jean-Luc Herbelot. Saloum is set in Senegal's 2003 military coup, which, if you remember the news at the time, was described as bloodless in the media,
Mhm.
but, distinctly not very so, according to the locals. We follow the Bangui Hyenas, who they are a trio of mercenaries with legendary, almost mythical reputations.
Mhm.
The Hyenas, this mercenary group, are tasked with extracting a Mexican drug lord named Felix and a suitcase of gold bullion. Apparently, these mercenaries are rumored to be quote unquote sorcerers.
Mhm.
The Hyenas' supposedly straightforward task is to take Felix, the drug lord, to the car and collect a mountain of cash for their time and trouble. But when their fuel tank and their escape plane springs a leak, the hyenas are forced to set down in the Sine Saloum Delta, where Senegal's Saloum River meets the North Atlantic. The narrator tells us that Sine Saloum is a sacred and protected place and a land of myths and cursed kings. True to these words, Saloum shifts in tone to acquire an unsettling folk horror like ambiance, where the hyenas and Felix find refuge in Baobab, which is just a collection of seaside huts and cabins.
Mhm.
Baobab is run by Omar, who is like this oddball landlord who assigns chores to his guests, where it's kind of a condition for the accommodation. And you don't pay for your stay, but you do chores.
Yeah.
And so Omar hosts communal meals where wide-ranging topics include conversations about politics in post-colonial Africa and the sayings of Thomas Sankara, and about Pan-Africanist President Burkina Faso. There's a tense undercurrent that runs through these seemingly agreeable exchanges that is very palpable, as if the slightest wrong word or look could set things on a decidedly darker path. So there's a lot of great tension in the hyenas, being undercover and Felix being undercover, trying to get by in this place. To make things worse, among the camp's guests are a police chief named Suleiman,
Mhm.
and an intense young mute woman named Awa, who actually recognizes the hyenas and threatens to expose them unless certain conditions are met. In this kind of environment, in the company of these offbeat characters, the hyenas use sign language to communicate, and the film expertly exploits this device to ramp up tension and trigger unpredictable plot twists, especially with regards to the mute girl who also understands sign language and is able to decipher their secret communications.
Mhm.
Um, at around the halfway point, the mysterious atmosphere around Baobab coalesces into something explicitly supernaturally malevolent. The catalyst is a recurring nightmare experienced by the hyena's leader Chaka. His visions have compelled him to revisit this place and take revenge on those responsible for terrible crimes. Worse still, these offenses continue to be perpetrated in the service of a bargain with supernatural forces. Then monstrous beings are then unleashed that are really cool and unique. At first, these creatures appear to be like insects or birds,
Mhm.
kind of flocking together in a whirlpool like formation,
Yeah.
and then they morph into like human shaped figures with horns. But there's also more going on than these excellent CG creations. There are elements of the earth such as leaves and dirt and other organic material appear to be part of the mix, so they become like this whole supernatural slash natural beast. And the precise combination of these beings is hard to determine, but it's not in doubt that they are able to shock and produce suspense and terror. And unlike many horror films, like Saloum lets its monsters loose in exclusively broad daylight, and it's all the better for it. It's part a crime thriller, part horror fantasy, and part spaghetti western.
Mm-hmm.
Saloum is like this genre-hopping tale made with considerable style and imagination. I'm not easily surprised, and this film surprised me at every turn because I
Oh.
came in expecting to watch an extraction type movie about like African commandos like getting a drug dealer out of town, and then it becomes a spaghetti western,
Mm-hmm.
and then it becomes a folk horror. It packs a huge amount of action and information into 80 minutes, which is a very short movie. And this compact film keeps its pistons running and firing all throughout the mayhem. It never pauses long enough for you to catch your breath.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of like this West African art house gem. It's one of the best films I caught at SGIF this year, so I'm giving this 7.5 out of 10 as well.
Nice.
Next up, let's move on to an anime called Belle, which I don't know. Have you seen Belle yet?
I have not.
Sweet. Okay. Let me tell you a little bit about it. Belle is a dazzling new anime from Mamoru Hosada that combines pop stars, grieving high schoolers, and cyber dragons into a weird and wonderful skew on Beauty and the Beast for the digital age. Um, I caught this at a Cannes Film Festival screener, and it was one of my faves. But now it's out in GV and Cafe, so you can watch it there as well. The story follows Suzu, who is a 17-year-old living in a rural village.
Mm-hmm.
For years, she has been unable to process the passing of a mother who died in an accident that she doesn't quite understand. And as a result, has been growing distant from her well-meaning father. One day, she enters something called You, which is a virtual world of 5 billion members on the internet.
Mm-hmm.
In You, she becomes a world-famous pink-haired singer called Belle. How does this work? Thanks to biometric thanks to biometric data. So all the things that they gather from your body, from your mind. The biometric data amps up your online avatar with the user's inner strengths. Not your outward personality or outward looks. It's your inner self that is expressed in your avatar, right? So that's how she becomes like this superstar pop icon. So like inside this world of You, like this Ready Player One type world, she like meets with like this mysterious dragon avatar
Mm-hmm.
called Beast, and together they embark on like this journey of adventures and challenges of love, and they have this quest to become who they truly are. There's this mystery of who the Beast is, and that's the heart of the film, and also the heart of the film's heartbreaking climax, and it's a really good one.
Mm-hmm.
The visuals are astounding. It's filled with like this breathless mid-flight battles and spectacular scenes of giant whales swimming in a liquid sky. I think tonally the film strikes a careful balance between like a high school drama and the real world of its teen characters and the online Ready Player One-esque realm, but also explores like how those two environments
Mm-hmm.
bleed into each other. Like one is like this deluge of harsh realism, while the other is a fantasy of escapism. And while there are negatives to the VR game, to the VR game world, like the toxicity that comes with anonymity and superficial judgments of people you don't even know, I think Mamoru Hosada also emphasizes that there are some positives for people like Suzu,
Mm-hmm.
where the VR world presents like a therapy for the repressed who need encouragement to bring their inner selves out of hiding. It's a beautifully observed and dazzlingly animated sci-fi fairy tale about how our online slash offline double lives might coalesce, and it might be Hosada's finest film to date. I'm probably giving this an 8 out of 10, which is higher than previous two films.
Mm-hmm.
Now showing at Golden Village in Singapore, highly recommend that you check it out.
Nice.
Finally, let's talk about Hellbound on Netflix, which I think you caught a bit about, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Sweet. Okay. I think no other TV show in 2021 has an opening quite as explosive as Netflix's new South Korean horror called Hellbound.
Yep.
Within the first scene, in the first few minutes, we see a jittery man in a cafe looking anxiously at a clock on his phone. As time runs out, three hulking, demonic creatures appear from the ether, They gruesomely shred and incinerate him in like hellish flames, leaving nothing behind but ash. Right off the bat, we're introduced to a horrifying world where angels appear to inform people of their sins,
Mm-hmm.
forewarn them of their time of death before um, dark side slash swamp thing looking monsters show up at the appointed time to drag them to hell. In a typical horror narrative, the arrival of these malevolent, otherworldly entities is the scary thing. But what if these demonic killings were captured on camera phones, uploaded on social media, and became viral sensations? The threat of actual demons would pale in comparison to the religious zealotry, the public panic, and media frenzy that would ensue. And that's the premise behind this smart, spooky, and slow burning series. It's adapted from Yong Sang Ho's popular webtoon, The Hell, and directed by the director of Train to Busan.
Mm-hmm.
Hellbound is partly a crime procedural and partly an exploration of how misinformation can be spread and amplified in the internet age
Yep.
to manipulate people. The crime procedure aspect is led by a seasoned police detective still reeling from the murder of his wife 6 years ago, and is now unfortunately the officer tasked with investigating the supernatural deaths.
Mm-hmm.
Meanwhile, there's a lawyer named Min Hei-jin, who is also looking into the rise of a cult called the New Truth, who is led by the charismatic leader Chairman Zhang. The New Truthers proclaim the phenomena as a revelation from God, gaining power through its legions of devoted followers. To make matters worse, an extremist faction of New Truth called Arrowhead launches a campaign to publicly shame these so called sinners. Particularly in episode 2, they unveil the next victim as Jungja Park online. Shockingly, her only sin is that she's a single mother of two with different fathers for each child. A raving online pundit even presents this poor woman as a symptom of moral decay,
Mm-hmm.
encourages his viewers to dox her to prevent her two children from fleeing the country. Miss Park is then offered 3 million yen by the New Truth to broadcast her quote unquote demonstration, which is a demonic execution,
Mm-hmm.
the live to the masses. In this, the series presents like a Black Mirror ish horror, hundreds of onlookers and streamers and mainstream media assemble to watch a woman die. And I think Hellbound does a great job of depicting the ugliness of a vulnerable society in this new status quo. There's proof of the existence of hell and the implication of a vengeful God. So Puritans are given like public soapboxes to judge and condemn others. Religious organizations stoke fear to gain influence. Lunatics spout unfounded conspiracy theories online. There are fanatical lynch mobs roaming the street to dispense vigilante punishment to secular skeptics. All the while, the best media is there to lap it up for ratings. The show is filled with fascinating moral quandaries and social commentary,
Mm-hmm.
and the investigative threads present the drive that unravels with bigger picture mysteries and surprising character motivations. I think the show can be deliberate in its pacing, which might be a flaw, but I think Hellbound's spurts of grisly horror are spaced out to ensure that the characters and the viewers can properly consider the intriguing questions of morality and mortality presented. And they are very complex, and they depict the existential crises that can arise, and the convenient interpretations we assign to things that we don't understand. Essentially, it's a story about how human beings leap onto confirmation bias,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's ascribed to divine beings or not. That's why I'm giving this a 7.5 out of 10.
Ooh.
How much of Hellbound have you seen?
Just 2 episodes.
Sweet, okay.
Yeah. So I mean, like already, I've been kind of sold on the premise.
Mhm.
The world we live in is horrifying in very, very different ways, and I think sometimes we have a lot more to worry about than just demons dragging us to hell.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So, uh, yeah, I'm looking forward to completing it. And it's good to know that it's kind of consistent across the season.
Sweet. My review, just to let people know, is actually based on the first 3 episodes because I can't tell you what happens in episode 4
Yep.
because the show totally revamps the show revamps its cast in episode 4.
Yeah.
Like I can't tell what happens. It's just that they have a whole new cast. The story goes in a whole different direction, and it's such a big thing that I can't talk about it.
That's fine.
But yeah, I hope we get to that point soon lah. Anyways, now let's move on to Netflix's live action adaptation of Cowboy Bebop, starring John Cho. This has gotten like a lot of traction online for good and for bad. What is your opinion? Being a big Cowboy Bebop fan, now seeing Hollywood take its crack at such a beloved anime.
Yeah, so I decided, and I was telling kids a couple of months back when they were when the live action thing was about to be announced, and Netflix also put on the anime, the original anime, was
On
started being
Netflix, yeah.
available to be streamed on Netflix. I was like, oh, you know what? I'm gonna go rewatch the anime. It's been a couple of years, right? Been a huge fan of that. I think like Cowboy Bebop, the movie, was my first anime movie, and I was completely blown away by that. That was one of my first
Mm.
kind of introductions to how amazing the medium could be.
Yep.
Uh, oh, man, where do we begin? I think that was a mistake because, like, kind of watching most of the season of the original anime and then starting on that was not a good idea. The side by side
Mm.
comparison does not fare well. Um, so let's put it this way: you are a big Cowboy Bebop fan. You would like to see what the world would look like in live action. For some reason, like some of us always hope that a live action adaptation of one of our favorite animes may possibly be good.
Mm.
Cowboy Bebop does not do that, right?
Yep. Yep.
You will be vastly disappointed. I think that Troll's Spike lacks swagger.
Mm.
The fight scenes are clumsy. The
Mm.
editing is clumsy. It's a mess. It's a real mess. And it's very, very sad because I think like as much as they try to emulate something that has gone before, right? It's very clear, like that the opening credits and the music choices and all of that. The music choices aren't bad. Um, there is something. There's a standard that has been set, and it's a very high standard they're trying to live up to, but it falls short at every step of the way. The
Yep.
characters aren't interesting. The performances aren't interesting. Like there's nothing here being offered
Mm.
that the original anime does not have. So it
Yep.
puzzles me, and largely, and Hit and I were talking about this. Like anyone who has watched the anime and is a fan hates the live action, and
Mm.
anyone who hasn't watched the anime and is watching the live action says, it's okay, it's pretty good.
It's
Um,
kinder towards it, lah.
yeah, but why would you watch the live action when the anime exists? Is my
Mm.
kind of like main question, right? It feels extremely lost. Like the people who are attached to this project have an idea of what Cowboy Bebop is,
Yep.
but have no idea how, like they're missing the point, essentially,
Mm.
right? Above and beyond all like the toxic discussions about like changing Faye Valentine's, like, costume doesn't show enough skin. You're essentially like depowering what is a very like powerful like female icon within anime, da 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 da, and all like these fanboys kind of like bashing on that. I said like that's the least of their problems, right? I don't
Mm-hmm.
care what Faye Valentine is wearing if you can give me a Faye Valentine live action that's believable, and she's not. Spike
Mm.
is not. Yeah, like I mean, I think Cho makes a valiant effort, but it's not kind of the same, right? Like he doesn't have he's not smarmy enough. Number one, his Spike is not smarmy enough, and he
Yep.
he just doesn't have the gravitas to deliver the kind of lines that is necessary, right? So often the one-liners just fall so flat. It's
Mm.
cringeworthy.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, like I gave this 4 episodes, which is honestly 4 episodes more than I should have given it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna give it a 4.5, right, out of 10,
Okay.
just because I do feel that the possibility of it being a gateway for people who have not watched the original anime or the movies
Yeah.
uh, have an opportunity to discover something really good behind that, and
Mm-hmm.
that's the reason like it's like a barely fail, right? I
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
I don't understand. The editing is so bad. It is
Mm.
so bad. It is so clumsy, and like in a day and age where like the kind of martial arts that we get to see on screen, the kind of fight choreography that we're getting just from like TV shows on cable, like
Mm.
there's no reason why it should be that bad. You know, it's unfortunate. It really, really is.
Same. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I would agree with your rating. Like, perhaps I might even give it a bit lower, but 4.5 out of 10 seems more than fair. I'm still sticking with Netflix now.
Hmm.
For Super Crooks, which is set in Mark Millar's superhero universe,
Yep.
as introduced in Jupiter's Legacy. This is a stylish new anime. It is gorgeously animated,
Hmm.
hilarious and gory and breezily paced. Super Crooks follows a low-level electricity-wielding supervillain called Johnny Bolt as he embarks on the most dangerous heist of his career, when he is recruited by the legendary thief Vahit to be part of a crew that robs both the Union of Justice and the world's most feared crime boss. It is an insane job that will have these small time crooks up against the cops, up against the top level supervillains, and up against the top level superheroes that we've already seen in Jupiter's Legacy. Think the bloody violence and superpowered subversion of Invincible
Yep.
meets the art style, music, tone, and vibe of The Pretender,
Hmm.
and you kind of get why the series is very cool. It original? Not terribly, but as directed by Motonobu Hori and written by Daisato. It's also animated by Studio Bones, who is quite has a good reputation. The show is enjoyable and works in all the ways where Jupiter's Legacy failed, which is why this is 7 out of 10,
Hmm.
and much higher rated than Jupiter's Legacy. Next up, we have Big Mouth, which returns for its fifth season, which continues to crassly and smartly confront the horrors and indignities of puberty through absurdist comedy with hormone monsters and anthropomorphic genitals. And despite its intentionally juvenile grossness, the series has always been more than genital side gags and cum jokes. Previous seasons have been astutely able to tackle emotional growth of its characters as they stumble through adolescence and sexual awakening in deep, meaningful, and surprisingly smart ways. This season tries to do the same thing with episodes about body image
Hmm.
and insecurities and fears and jealousies and adolescent ideas of love, all while still steeped in that kind of gross out sexual humor.
Yeah.
I think the only problem is the season seems to find the show for the first time ever. It seems like this season is recycling itself.
Hmm.
It's as if Big Mouth has run out of new things to say and run out of funny ways to present them.
Hmm.
It's still a really fun show, but the ratio of genuinely LOL jokes and deep insight is much lower in season 5 because everything they try here, they've tried before, which is why I'm only giving this a 6 out of 10. Next up, let's move on to Lamb,
Mm.
which is now showing at the projector, or if you're overseas, it's available on VOD. Lamb is a quiet and sparse folk horror from Iceland, the newest from A24's, art house genre canon. The film follows a childless couple in rural Iceland who rear sheep.
Hmm.
One day, they discover an unusual lamb in their barn, a creature with the head of a sheep and the body of a human baby. It's a little like Sweet Tooth. The titular creature is a combination of child actors and puppetry and real animals and CGI, and it's actually quite adorable and amusing, but
Hmm.
also oddly unsettling. However, most of the film consists of relatively mundane depictions of rural domesticity. You see scenes of them farming, cooking, fixing tractors, and so forth. While it is beautiful, especially with its isolated mood and gorgeous natural scenery, it is frankly rather boring, and the mundanity is given just the slightest friction of surrealism by the presence of a hybrid creature dressed in the cutesy wardrobe of human toddler. Unfortunately, I think Lamb's novel premise only goes so far, and past a certain point, the film's quietly deadpan minutiae simply becomes tedious.
Hmm.
This is primarily because its themes of grief and domestic strife and parenthood are so flimsily explored. So I'm giving this a 5 out of 10. Unfortunately, this one just doesn't work for me. Yeah, I think
Oh man. Hmm.
it's a bit sad lah. Finally, I'm going to be talking about Disney's Encanto, which is the new animated feature coming out of Walt Disney Animation. Encanto has a lot going for it, particularly because Lin Manuel Miranda wrote the soundtrack to it. So
Hmm.
you already know it has a good song. It has tons of good songs and a fabulous soundtrack.
Yep.
It follows the Madrigal family who live hidden in the mountains of Colombia, in a magical house, in a vibrant town, in a wondrous and charmed place called Encanto. The magic of Encanto has blessed every child in the family with a unique superpower, ranging from super strength to super healing. Um, well, every child except for one, named Mirabelle, who is voiced by Brooklyn Nine-Nine's Stephanie Beatrice.
Mhm.
Um, but when she discovers that the magic surrounding Encanto is in danger, Mirabelle decides that she, the only super powerless ordinary Madrigal, might just be her family's last hope.
Mhm.
First off, this is a beautiful film to look at. It has crisp and colorful design work, surprisingly photorealistic character touches, creative and stylish, and fantastical musical sequences. The film set in Colombia has a distinctive and welcome sense of place and culture. That being said, the movie is ultimately incredibly formulaic, filled with the tropes and beats found in every other Disney cartoon movie. Um, don't get me wrong, there's so much to enjoy about Encanto, particularly the songs by Lin-Manuel Miranda, the gorgeous animation, the cultural traditions, but the script's shortcoming and predictability are its undoing, so which is why this is a 6 out of 10 for me. Uh, let's move on to Isa's take on one of Netflix's biggest hits of the
Oh
year, particularly
yeah.
biggest animation hit of the year, which is based on the popular video game League of Legends. Let's talk about Arcane. What do you think about season one of Arcane, which just recently wrapped up?
Oh man. As I was kind of preparing my notes for Arcane, I had to
Yeah.
ask myself the question: is it because we have not had any good steampunk shit come out in a long time? That's what I feel really strongly about Arcane. Or is it
Mm,
the fact that like Arcane is just really, really good? In fact, it might be, in my opinion, one of the top contenders for best video game adaptation
mm,
that we've ever gotten, right? And to list a number of things that we have covered that we totally love that are all from video games, we've got Castlevania, we've got
Dota?
we've got Dota, right?
Yeah.
And then now we have Arcane as well.
Yep.
Arcane stands out for the big reason that it has decided to go a completely different animation route. Instead of kind of your standard animation, it has gone for the ever increasingly popular cell shading style of 3D animation,
Mm-hmm.
which I think Hits and I have complained about like to no end. But
Yeah,
that being,
it works sometimes, but most of the time
yeah,
no lah.
yeah, most
Yeah.
of the times, well, I think Arcane for like a good 80% of its entirety, it definitely works out. Arcane has some of the most insane fight scenes I've seen in this style. It's extremely high quality. The world is well thought out. Like Piltover and Zan are just fascinating looks at a steampunk-ish dystopian society, dystopian utopian society.
Mm-hmm.
And the characters are interesting. Like I'm not a big League of Legends guys. I never really got into that. Never been exposed to the lore, but I think it's done a fantastic job at just kind of like developing its characters. Now, my
Yep.
main issue with that, right? Music is. I mean, there's only so many Imagine Dragon songs I want to hear
Mm-hmm.
at a time, but like I do feel that cinematography has been interesting. It has been varied. Sometimes it has been breathtaking.
Mm-hmm.
I do feel like the action again, like hands down, some of the best action I've seen in animation this year in this particular style.
Yep.
It feels grand, it feels consequential, it feels heavy, right? The story itself may not necessarily be exploring some of the darker and overarching themes to the extent that you might want, right? The idea
Mm-hmm.
of like privilege and poverty, um, and segregation and things like that. I don't think it gets fully fleshed out as it could possibly be. But then again,
Yep.
I'm not here for that necessarily. The fact that they highlight these things, I think is good enough.
Okay.
My main issue is that cell shading still hasn't caught up in its ability to mimic facial expressions to the degree in
Mm,
which it is believable, right? Which is
yep.
something that I think a lot of the more traditional anime styles have managed to do. Um, not in a like hyper realistic way, but in a way that at least conveys its meaning. And I think that Arcane definitely does struggle from that. There are just too many
Mm,
moments that break your immersion when the voice acting conveys an emotion that just doesn't match what you see on the character's face on screen.
yeah, I
And,
agree.
and that has been my biggest kind of like demerit point against Arcane. I do
Mm,
think as technology kind of gets better, that will change in due time. But man, like all in all, like Arcane is quite a trip, right? To
yep.
have magic in a steampunk world is one of the combinations that we haven't got that much of in recent years. In the last decade, I would say.
Mm,
And to have all of that fleshed out um, in a very, very compelling way has just made this whole package in general extremely enjoyable. So I'm going to
yeah.
give it an 8 out of 10, which I
Nice.
think ranks up there with Castlevania Season 1
Yeah.
when we first reviewed it. What are your thoughts, Hits?
I'm giving this a slightly lower 7.5 out of 10.
Yeah,
Primarily because I echo all the strengths, so I don't need to repeat that.
yeah.
But like the cell shading doesn't work for me, but it works here because it's dynamic in its action,
Mm-hmm.
and I think it has this real like artistic flair to it. The art reminds me of like Fiona Staples' Sega art.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So I really like all that, like the hand painted aesthetic and all that. It's so gorgeous, but I really dislike the derivativeness of the YA sci-fi fantasy
Oh,
storytelling.
mm-hmm. Yeah,
It's very tropey and very cliche, and
yeah.
and I saw where every plot line was going like 6 episodes before. So that to me the uninterestingness of the story
Yeah.
fails me, but I love the aesthetic and I love everything else about it, like visually.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's why it's a 7.5 or a bit lower than the 8 out of 10.
Yeah, I mean, like it's made for its target audience, you know.
Yeah,
Like Riot had to come out with big swings, and I think they did a pretty good job as far as that's possible. I'm
yeah.
not expecting like a masterpiece of a story, right?
Mm-hmm.
Given that again, this is largely made for the fans, and if they get more fans along the way, you know, I think it's a win for them, right?
Yep.
But I mean, if we could get a storytelling within this world that is amazing, that kind of matches like the artistry of its aesthetic, then
Yeah.
sure, right? I would definitely be down for that. But yeah, overall, it's an enjoyable thing. Just don't think too much about it.
Yeah, definitely, man. Next up, gonna be delving to the last batch of quick hits. First up, I'm gonna be talking about Dr. Brain, which is a new Korean sci-fi series on Apple TV.
Yeah.
Dr. Brain follows, wouldn't you know it, a brain scientist named Siwon, who is looking for clues on the mysterious accident that claimed his family.
Yeah.
He does this by using experimental technology on memory transfer to access the memories of the dead. The premise sounds decent and holds potential, but aside from kind of brief sparks of genuinely disturbing ideas, much of the season plays like a run of the mill detective thriller
Hmm.
with a slight tinge of the supernatural. It is competently made, but thoroughly unspecial, so it's a 5 out of 10 for me.
Mm.
Next up, let's talk about Ghostbusters Afterlife, which is probably the biggest cinematic release next to Eternals this month.
Yeah.
It takes place 5 years after the ill-fated female-centric Ghostbusters reboot. Here's a brand new attempt to revive the franchise.
Hmm.
This time, it's a canon entry directed by Jason Reitman, the son of the original film's director, Ivan Reitman. And probably because of that family connection, Ghostbusters Afterlife is absolutely obsessed with the theme of legacy and inheritance, which is why this new movie is all about the original characters and, even more importantly, their children. Afterlife takes place in a mostly empty small town of Oklahoma, where a single mother named Kelly, played by Carrie Coon, and her children, Trevor, played by Finn Wolfhard, and Phoebe, played by McKenna Grace, they move there after getting evicted from their urban apartment. They find themselves on a farm belonging to their granddad, who is an original Ghostbuster. These kids, along with their newfound classmates, soon find and dust off, the proton packs. They find the Ecto 1, and they use all this to face down pretty much the exact same ghostly villains that their predecessors fought in 1984.
Hmm.
There are some jokes here with Paul Rudd, who brings a little lightness to the kids' adventure. He plays the science teacher, Mr. Gruberson.
Yeah.
But overall, it's hard to escape the sensation of a corpse being exhumed. Um, Afterlife desperately wants to summon the spirit of watching the first movie,
Hmm.
but ends up being a nostalgia trip object,
Mm.
kind of devoid of its own soul. This is exactly the kind of danger in nostalgia that Last Night in Soho warns you about.
Yeah.
Is 4 out of 10 for me. Total fail. Finally, before we delve into anime corner,
Yeah.
I have my own anime movie to talk about, which is
Yeah.
My Hero Academia, World Heroes Mission. otherwise known as My Hero Academia, the movie 3. Um, the movie is finally in Singapore thanks to the distributors Odex, and I got to see an early preview at Cafe earlier this month.
Mm-hmm.
World Heroes mission focuses on a doomsday terrorist faction called Humorize that is organizing to decimate the quirk population. The cult's beliefs are based on the quirk doomsday theory, which is mentioned in season 4, which
Mm-hmm.
posits that interbreeding among superpowered humans may evolve human powers that can overwhelm and destroy humanity. So they plant gas bombs containing the trigger drug introduced in the anime
Mm-hmm.
worldwide to mass murder quirked humans and leave behind the pure, quote unquote, pure, quirkless individuals in the New World Order. As a
Yeah.
result, Japan's greatest heroes disperse across the globe in an attempt to find the ringleader and bring him to justice. A part of Endeavor's team is, of course, Deku, Bakugo, and Todoroki, who travel to the European nation of Ophion. But
Mm-hmm.
after stopping a robbery gone wrong, Deku finds himself framed for a mass murder and on the run with a two-bit criminal with both Ophion's police force and the terrorists hot on his trail. One of the film's best aspects, actually, is Deku's relationship with this petty criminal named Roddy. The juxtaposition between the optimistic Deku and the cynical civilian just struggling to make ends meet is quite good. Their dynamic makes for a fun buddy road movie kind of vibe.
Yeah.
The animation is also spectacular with a budget that allows the fight scenes to seem more epic and cinematic than what we get weekly. We
Mm-hmm.
saw that in the first two My Hero Academia movies. The action sequences are just so far above and beyond what we see on a TV show. But despite the stakes, this latest film suffers from the problem of all the other movies in that nothing happens here feels like it matters. Like the movies are fun right until the end
Mm.
when the easy resolution prevails. It always boils down to Deku powering up and punching the villain harder than he used to punch the villain. It's the the intriguing complexity of the villain's motives are not explored at
Yeah.
all, and it feels like a waste of time because the films don't want to affect the status quo in the show. I guess, nevertheless, it's solid enough in its watchability. It has crowd-pleasing action, good side gags, and has a nice insight into the core relationships. But for all the wealth of material, there's little substance here, which is why this is only a 6 out of 10.
Mm.
Yeah, I suppose you will be watching World Heroes Mission soon anyway, lah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like,
It's,
just to fill in the blanks, basically.
definitely, yeah.
Yeah. It
You
is.
don't need to, but it's okay, lah.
Yeah. I mean, like, eventually I'll get to it. I don't think, again, like, my main issue with a lot of the movies for My Hero Academia is that it's usually of no consequence, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, it doesn't really affect, like, the mainline story, with the exception of what was the other one that we reviewed recently? With the one where they're older, right? Like, that's the only one that, like, you kind of has any, like, significant impact on the
Yeah.
story that we are following in the main line.
Yep.
But yeah, I do worry that, like, it oftentimes feels that we're going like One Punch Man direction, like everything can be settled with a punch.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, hopefully, that it doesn't devolve into that.
The
Not
key
that
difference is
yeah.
One Punch Man is intentionally making fun of that trope, whereas My
Yeah.
Hero Academia is unintentionally falling in that trope.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but oh well. Um, that's enough of My Hero Academia. I think that's the last we'll talk about My Hero Academia for this year at least.
Yeah.
Let's move on to other anime with Isa's Anime Corner, where we'll be talking about returning anime,
Yep.
new anime, and some other notable mentions. What
Yeah.
stands out to you in this season of anime, Isa?
There's a couple of things. I mean, again, right, spring has been the most amazing anime season we've seen in recent history.
Absolutely.
Summer was abysmal. I think, with the exception of Sunny Boy, which, did you end up finishing Sunny Boy?
I did. I love the finale.
Yeah, with the exception of Sunny Boy last season, and a
Mhm.
couple of other things that we already covered in my last anime corner, there
Yep.
wasn't really much in the summertime. I think Sunny Boy was a fascinating kind of, like, exploration of the strangeness that anime can bring to the
Yeah.
table when you get more experimental about that. And just like a fascinating study in, like, negative space, both in terms of the oral realm and the visual realm. Um, this season we have, I want to highlight a couple of, like, returning enemies that we've either covered before or haven't been around for a while.
Yep.
um ag- Demon Slayer is back. For those of you that don't know, Demon Slayer is back.
Mm-hmm.
It is screening on Netflix as streaming on Netflix as well, week by week.
Yeah.
Because I mean, obviously, it's Demon Slayer, right? It's one of the big three at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
That's back. As Hits has covered before already, like we are re-exploring the train arc.
Mm-hmm.
Um, which is great because we're getting a ton more stuff. It is everything that the movie should have been
Mm-hmm.
expanded and in the format that it should have been told in. So that has been really good so far. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
just basically going to breeze through the rest as well.
Sure.
Mushoku Tensei, Jobless Reincarnation, is back for its second season. Our very pervy our very pervy protagonist Rudius is back and continues his adventuring with this mishmash of party members that we left off in the first season.
Mm-hmm.
The stakes continue to grow as the party just kind of like meanders their way back towards looking for their families. It's more of the same, right? Still entirely enjoyable, but the world itself is fascinating, and there's a huge growing mystery around the things that happen in season one and how that's going to be resolved. We are not there yet. I think we're only halfway through the season so far,
Mm.
but still entirely enjoyable. If you can stomach the very strange, creepy middle-aged man in the body of a child.
Yep.
Yes. Next I'm going to talk about 86. I covered 86 a while ago,
I,
like 2 seasons ago.
yep.
Just a
I remember.
refresher. Yeah,
Yeah.
just a refresher for anybody who like 86 is it's a war anime essentially, right? There is an entire group of people known as the 86 who are disenfranchised. They don't own property, they have no rights. They're basically meat fodder for the front lines.
Mm-hmm.
And where a lot of people were saying that the original light novel that 86 the anime was based on was extremely heavy-handed in terms of its themes of like racism, privilege, social disparity, and kind of like the exploitation of like of human other humans in order to kind of advance political goals. 86 season one had an amazing nuance that wasn't present in the light novels itself. I think it definitely brought it to life. 86
Yeah.
part 2 resolves the main arc of season 1 and shows us where our group of protagonists are at post-war, and instead looks at the unavoidable, inevitable effect that war has on its participants at every level in society, but mainly focusing on the 86.
Yep.
It is incredible. Like the way in which they go about telling this story and resolving the kind of like personal conflicts as well as their own, like processing their own trauma, is some of the best stuff I've seen in a war story in anime. Like
Mm-hmm.
ever, honestly,
Yeah.
right? And it is kind of mind blowing. So 86 continues to be extremely compelling. And it's not for everyone for sure. Like there's a lot of violence, there's a lot of very difficult things to watch. It's not an easy watch. It is a war anime after all.
Mm-hmm.
But just the way in which they treat kind of like the exploration of some of the themes that they are looking for is extremely nuanced and extremely well written as you follow these characters trying to find life after war when their whole life has been war. Yeah,
Mm.
so like this really really surprised me. I thought it was going to be more of the same. It went in a different direction, but with the same kind of care that you don't often get from an anime about like mechas and war. So 86 part 2 highly recommended if you love the first one. If you haven't seen the first one, go check it out because I still think that's one of the best kind of like mecha military anime that we've seen in a while.
Awesome. Okay.
I've talked about World Trigger not too long ago. Third season is up, continuing essentially this fascinating kind of sci-fi world that is very, very slowly unfolding.
Yep.
Um, but again, all the things that I've loved about the original series and what we've expanded on in season 2 is back. The team is now closer to their goal of trying to get onto their rescue mission to another planet, which I'm very excited about because it's about damn time. It's been
Mm-hmm.
like 50 something episodes to get to this point. But it's I'm still not tired of it. Strangely enough, I think the pacing a bit slow is still good enough and compelling enough for me to continue watching it week to week. But for those of you that have picked up World Trigger, based upon our recommendations or just something like it is back for season 3. And I'm very interested to see. I have a feeling this season is going to end just before they leave, so that they can secure a season 4.
Yeah.
But so far, it's been good. Finally, I've spoken about Restaurant to Another World, which is now back for a second season.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, essentially, there, in certain places in different worlds, whether it's modern Japan or in like these fantasy worlds, there are these doors, magical doors that lead you to a very specific like kind of izakaya that's helmed by a magical cook slash boss. uh
Okay.
this is your fix of animated food porn, right? We don't have shokugeki anymore for the time being. It's a very light-hearted, kind of lovely, interesting format in which there's always a new dish that they're going to introduce with new characters who are kind of like these individual stories of people coming to an izakaya for food, for companionship, for storytelling, and just kind of sharing within the social space of a meal, right? I entirely enjoyed season 1. Season 2 doesn't actually bring anything different from that. But like, please do not watch this on an empty stomach. You will not make it through.
Mm-hmm.
Trust me on this. Yeah, the characters are cute. And it's as simple as that. It's a bunch of interesting, cute stories of people from various worlds, fantasy and sci-fi, and all kinds of walks of life, who meet in a magical izakaya to eat what looks like ridiculously delicious food. So that's
Awesome.
back for season 2. Moving on to new anime this season that are noteworthy and outstanding. I'm first going to talk about the two that have broken out of delayed broadcast on Netflix, which is usually a case that Netflix really believes in what's going on. First one I'm going to talk about is Blue Period, which was something I highlighted to Hidzir fairly on. Um, Essentially, Blue Period, we follow Yatora Yaguchi, who is like a delinquent. He's kind of obsessed with like the idea of popularity, but he has excellent grades, right? But he's just a little bit lost. His interactions with with a childhood friend, and eventually the art club sparks a desire in him to pursue art. Um, as kind of like a way to find something more fulfilling in his life. uh, it is one of those animes that is beautifully animated. It is very detailed in terms of like explaining and teaching what the different artistic practices and highly educational in a way that I did not expect it to be,
Mm-hmm.
all while being a very kind of like inspiring and emotionally compelling slice of life. Um, as a teenager who is finding his identity through learning art, right? I really, really enjoyed this.
Nice.
Of course, Blue Period is a reference to Yves Klein, his own Blue Period, right? Where basically he was only using blue for all of his artworks.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, so like if kind of like traditional visual art is anything that you're sort of interested in, I would say that this is for you. If you've always wondered what it's like to be an art student, this is for you. The interactions between the characters are cute, and um uh, they are it could be more nuanced, I think, but a lot of the time I think I tend to forget that these are high school students, and that like high school drama is a very real and important thing to high schoolers.
Mm-hmm.
But outside of that, like I'm really, really enjoying this. It gives me your lie in April vibes. Just in terms of like the way in which you follow along a journey of self-discovery with a young man in an artistic medium.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, so Blue Period, highly recommend. Next up, the only other anime that has broken out of delayed broadcast is Komi Can't Communicate, which is an anime about a girl with severe social anxiety who is stuck in a school with the zaniest of characters. Komi Can't Communicate comes for you courtesy of OLM. If you don't know, we've been talking about Ola M a lot recently because they made Odd Taxi. They are also the guys who made the new Pokemon series. And if you haven't seen what the new Pokemon series look like, you are missing out because it is nothing like what you remember it to be. Uh, but yeah, essentially we follow Hito Tarano, who's just an ordinary boy who claims like his superpower is kind of reading the room, which is not true because he doesn't know how to read the room. Who accidentally, I guess, manages to befriend the Belle of the school, who is this amazingly beautiful, extremely talented um, idol within the school who has severe social anxiety and basically can't communicate with anybody. He eventually vows to help her find 100 friends, and that's what the entire kind of series is about. There's some very real things about that. As someone who has one struggle from social anxiety, I can tell you, it never makes fun of the condition. Although a lot of the situations that the characters find themselves in are hilarious. But it brings up some very kind of real things and plays it to a satisfactory kind of like emotional resolution whenever there is progress in her ability to kind of like socialize and make friends for that. It's really funny. I'm really really enjoying this. It's just one of those things that I love the fact that you can take a subject matter like severe anxiety and social anxiety and treat it in a way that is light-hearted without making it a joke.
Nice.
And it has been a super interesting watch just because of that. Like I think a lot of thought has to be put into being having a balanced view, right, of what a struggle like that is like. So Komi Can Communicate on Netflix. That is another one of my recommendations for that.
Awesome.
uh, as always, this season we've gotten its fair share of isekai, of which the one that stands out the most at the moment is one that's called Faraway Paladin.
Mm-hmm.
Same kind of deal. Hikikomori ends up being reincarnated in another world, but this world is really fascinating. He essentially gets found as a baby who is raised by three different types of undead, like a skeleton man, a zombie, and a ghost. And the grand mystery is as to why these people are undead. uh, it has been a very interesting kind of world building journey. I think just as he goes about with the skills that he's being taught by these supernatural kind of immortal creatures, and his own kind of journey, eventually becoming the champion of the deity that brought him into this world,
Mm.
and his quest to find out why it is that his very strange family are the way they are, and it's been really quite fun
Oh,
for
okay.
that so far. Uh, so that's my isekai pick of this season.
Mm-hmm.
Um, okay, so I'm gonna go into my top three picks. Right.
Nice.
First up, Takt Op Destiny.
Okay.
When I first heard that this was coming out, I was just like, okay, right. Bandai Namco Arts wanted to do a mixed media project centered on classical music, and they were going to release an RPG game for smartphones developed by the game studio. And I thought to myself,
Wow.
okay, this is going to be pretty shit, right? I
Yeah.
mean, like most of the time, any sort of game tie-ins are pretty shit. And then I found out that the people who are in charge of the anime are Madhouse and Mappa, which is the most incredible collaboration that anime has seen thus far, just by pure names alone, right? We've talked about
Yeah.
Madhouse anime all the time. We've talked about Mappa anime all the time. So I had very mixed feelings going into this. But let me just give you kind of like some of the premise, right?
Okay.
So the US has been in chaos ever since the emergence of what are they called, like D2s, right? These invading species that have invaded from a black meteorite that fell to Earth. There is a public banning of all types of melody or music to prevent casualties because D2s hate music.
Oh.
And in the year like 2047, right, this ban is still in effect. The
Okay.
only form of defense against this invading force are the music arts, so who are these young women who represent pieces of classical music, right? and the conductors who are essentially their handlers. We follow Takt, the titular character Takt, who is a piano prodigy, finds himself transformed into a conductor following being caught up with an attacked by the D2,
Mm-hmm.
and eventually comes into contact with his music art, who's called Destiny, and they're searching for a means to stabilize the pack within themselves because they're not really sure what that's about, and therefore embark on a perilous journey with a normal human being called Anna towards the Symphonica headquarters in New York City. Uh,
Mm.
this anime is fascinating not only because of the phenomenal visual spectacle that is Madhouse X Mappa, but also the fact that this anime outside of the fight scenes has no music.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, and the music pieces are phenomenal. Like every fight scene feels so much more heightened because it has music in it. And it's kind of mind blowing how conflicted I felt about this. There's so many signs that this would be bad, but I'm actually really enjoying it. Is the premise original? Not necessarily. Is the storyline a bit contrived? Yes, sure. But man, watch it just for like the artwork and the music. That's kind of it,
Oh,
right? There are scenes here where I've checked out a couple of YouTube videos where you have these like classical musicians and instrumentalists who are just commenting about the amount of detail and nuance that they've put into animating any sort of like piano playing or violin playing
mm-hmm.
within the anime itself, and they're like, it's spot on, right? Like there hasn't been something this detailed since Your Lie in April, and they're super hyped about it. So Tag
Nice.
OP Destiny, kind of like out of left field because again, game tie-ins almost never do well.
Mm-hmm.
It is receiving a lot of mixed reviews. Largely, people are loving the collaboration for sure. Some of them are just like, this is another cash grab. Just because you're involving two major enemy studios doesn't make a difference for that. Sure, by all means, right? But I'm entirely enjoying this just because I think like having the lack of music being a center point and the idea of music as rebellion from an oppressive force is just a story that I can get with.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's one of my top three. Next up, I'm going to
Nice.
talk about the most technically accomplished anime I've seen in a while, and that is Heike Monotagari. Right.
Okay.
So the Tale of Heike is like is a traditional Japanese epic, right? Um, that talks about the Taira clan and the Minamoto clan, who are struggling for control in Japan. At the end of the 12th century in the Genpei War. The whole of Heike Monotagari looks like a Japanese painting. It
Wow.
is insanely beautiful and it looks insanely difficult to pull off. It is one of the most visually unique anime to come out in a long while.
Mm-hmm.
On top of that, their twist to the Heike tale, whereby we follow a young girl who is gifted with an odd ability to see the future, uh, and at the cost of her father's life, and gets embroiled in the political and military mess that is the Genpei War. It's just a very kind of fresh take on it, right? There are a number of other animes that have covered this exact same story, but the art style combined with the very unique perspective on it, combined with the fact that it has an amazing soundtrack composed purely of traditional Japanese instruments, makes this like a technical marvel to watch. Uh,
Nice.
it is, yeah, it is. This is a literal moving piece of art. Um, and I don't say that often as much as I love anime. That
Mm-hmm.
being said, it covers well trodden ground with a new perspective. I'm really, really enjoying this. It's very difficult not to just kind of get lost in the visual and oral aspect of this story. The characters are well fleshed out. Voice acting is fantastic. Um, I'm really, really enjoying this. This is my second top pick of this season.
Wow. Okay.
Brought to you by Science Saru, who we've talked about. They worked on one episode in in Star Wars Visions. Most
Mm-hmm.
famously, they've done Devilman Crybaby as well. And like I think this is probably the most ambitious project that they worked on so far. Just in terms of like pushing the boundaries with what anime can possibly look like. And I
Mm-hmm.
highly recommend if you want like something very, very different from your usual isekai shonen stuff.
Okay. Nice.
My top pick, and the pick that I don't think I would have imagined uh ever picking,
Mhm.
is called Ousama Ranking, also known as Ranking of Kings. Right, brought to
Okay.
you by Wit Studio, who, of course, as most of you know, have brought us Attack on Titan, Owari no Seraph, Vinland Saga, and a lot of like these extremely popular kind of like action shonen style anime.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Osama Ranking is a passion project, right? It's an entirely origin. It's adapted from a web manga. Its animation looks really old, like a throwback to the 90s, kind of like your Doraemon style, uh maybe even like indicative of like early Disney type animation, right? A lot
Okay.
of it's very flat. It looks like it's made for children. It's very cutesy. Um, but this is at the moment the top ranked anime on my anime list and my top pick of the season.
Wow. Okay.
Basically, we follow Prince Boji, who is both deaf and mute. They call him the useless prince, and he lives in a world whereby there exists this thing called the ranking of kings, right? Where every king who comes into power is ranked according to how strong they are on a martial kind of level, like a martial or military level.
Mm-hmm.
He is small and he is weak and he can neither hear nor speak. But while Boji kind of struggles with all of that, he's not weak of heart. This feels very much like your typical tale of like heart triumphing over everything. But it is incredibly heartwarming and moving to see him one step at a time try and overcome all the things that that he's been burdened down with, um and all the and proving all the naysayers wrong, right?
Yep.
The world building is kind of fascinating. The premise is kind of fascinating. It's a super interesting world. um and the characters, although in the beginning feel kind of cliched, like get fleshed out very quickly, very fast, in very deep and unexpected ways. um yeah, there are no kind of like long hand waving expository lines, where they kind of like give you the entire backstory so you can get into the action of the thing. Osama Ranking takes its time with the hero's journey, quite literally,
Mm-hmm.
here, and it has been an illuminating watch, if nothing else.
Okay.
It does not have the technical prowess of Heike Monotagari. It does not have the visual pizzazz of a Madhouse Mappa Takt Op Destiny.
Mm-hmm.
But man, I'm really enjoying this story.
Awesome.
That I feel so invested in this one character more so than I have of any other character this season. And yeah, it's some people are not gonna like the animation, but I really much like Odd Taxi, I would suggest that you give this a try. You never know what it will speak to you. Yeah.
Nice. Well, how would you rank it next to your Eternity or Taxi?
I mean, if you're talking about, okay, so Takt Op Destiny is basically this season's VV, right? Like
Okay.
both in terms of the music, in terms of the visual spectacle, and in terms of like its weaknesses. I would think that this ranks probably third behind Odd Taxi and To Your Eternity. In terms
Oh,
of like
okay. Okay.
how much I am enjoying this, I don't think it is like brilliantly art house or anything of the sort.
Okay.
Um, like Odd Taxi is, or isn't like this grand kind of like grand scale across the centuries story that To Your Eternity is. This is
Mm-hmm.
just a very simply well told story that's like written with um the inner world and emotional struggle of someone who can't communicate in mind, um
Yep.
to the best degree that I've seen in a long time. Yeah,
Okay,
so
okay.
yeah, Ranking of Kings, like totally unexpected for that. Yeah,
Nice.
so those are my top three picks for this particular season. I'm gonna just quickly list a couple of other animes that are of note. Notable mentions, essentially things that you don't really have to think about. Is nothing deep. Things that I've kind of enjoyed. First up is Meiruko-chan, which is based upon an insanely popular comedy supernatural horror manga
Mm-hmm.
of a girl who basically can see spirits, but is trying to go about her very normal kind of high school life. I don't think that the anime is as good as the manga. I think like a lot of the horror elements have been played down, unfortunately. And you are now also served with an insane dose of fan service. Like this anime is so horny. It is
Mm-hmm.
kind of, it's not necessarily off-putting, but the gap between like those scenes and then immediately going into like this horrifying kind of like specter that's like trailing this girl around is quite strange. But
Mm-hmm.
still incredibly popular. Still ranks fairly high. I think a lot of the goodwill from the manga has carried over to that. And
Mm-hmm.
it's by all means an enjoyable watch. I do like when the tone shifts more into the horror stuff, which was what I was hoping more of. Um, but yeah, just something for those of you that have a little horror that you need to nick.
Sweet.
Um,
Okay.
Irina, the vampire cosmonaut, is interesting. Basically, it's like what if vampires existed in during the time when the space race was happening, essentially, right? And
Yep.
they're discriminated against. They are vastly misunderstood as a species. And basically, they're sending Irina, who is a vampire, out into space after they send Laika, the dog. Right? If that says anything about the kind of struggles the vampires are facing within the
Mm-hmm.
Russian Federation at this point in time. I think it's just a fairly interesting kind of premise. The whole idea of the other and exploring that within this sort of like historical fiction where vampires and maybe question mark other sort of supernatural creatures exist. I will say
Mm.
though, this anime has a strange oral fixation. There's a lot of close up shots of like lip smacking, lip licking,
Mm.
consumption of like food. A lot of that repeatedly. So, and not that it's not well done. It's just that there's a tad much of it, which I
A
find
lot.
kind of interesting. Yeah, the oral
Yeah.
fixation is kind of, it's interesting within the context of the story because she is a vampire, but they do lean into it a bit much.
Okay.
But it's an interesting context. I'm kind of enjoying it as something that I don't really need to think too deeply about as well. Uh, my workplace comedy pick of this season is called My Senpai is Annoying. We
Mm-hmm.
follow a very petite chibi saleswoman, Futaba Igarashi, who has held on to her sales job for almost 2 years, thanks to the guidance of her senior coworker, um, who is basically a giant, right? Like he's huge and she's small. This is a really fun, funny workplace comedy with some romance dashed into it that has a lot of great laugh out loud jokes. Yeah, it's been really fun. Some of the jokes are a bit more risque than I would necessarily be comfortable repeating here, but like a
Okay.
ton of laugh out loud moments. Like it's been a while since like a good workplace comedy anime that's this funny has been out, so I've been enjoying that.
Nice. Okay.
Okay, just three more left.
Mm-hmm.
Two of which we dive back into the ridiculously long title of "The World's Finest Assassin Gets Reincarnated into Another World as an Aristocrat."
Okay.
Isekai. He's overpowered, but not as overpowered as the guy that he's trying to assassinate.
Mm-hmm.
It has some very interesting kind of spycraft and assassin craft going on that they kind of explain on within a world that has magic, some political
Yeah.
intrigue. Overall, a fun watch, and some moral gray areas here and there for you to kind of think about.
Okay.
The other one is banished from the hero's party. I decided to live a quiet life in the countryside. This one, not isekai, fantasy world, basically a slice of life of a retired hero.
Mm-hmm.
Very fun, very wholesome, interesting way of kind of like interplaying with his past as his sister is the hero. He's been supporting her. He got kicked out of the party because he's too weak, and there's a cap in this world to how strong you can actually get. So
Okay.
he opens up an apothecary, Eventually, one of the former adventurers who used to who he's cross paths with, who is interested in him, finds him, decides to retire from adventuring, and the two of them run an apothecary in a town, uh, like a small kind of boondocks, right? It's very
Fascinating.
cute. It's very fun. The romance is kind of sweet. As
Okay.
these two are totally like not cut out for romance whatsoever.
Okay.
So that has been really good. Last one I'm going to talk about is Sakugan,
Mhm.
which is brought to you by Satellite, who are the people who most famously have worked on Log Horizon, but also on a couple of episodes of Hellsing Ultimate.
Yep.
Yeah, this is, this is your kind of like typical future dystopia. Humanity has retreated underground into this space kind of called the labyrinth, which is where different human clusters live, known as colonies.
Hmm.
And the above ground slash the middle ground is now occupied by kaiju, which range from like these tiny human-like monsters to like massive kind of beasts. This is your my kaiju mecha pick of this season. We follow a 9-year-old college graduate who's basically an inventor that has worked very hard to kind of benefit the workers in her kind of local company. But her grand desire is to go out on a never-ending adventure in the upper world with the robot that she designed, much to the chagrin of her very protective single father. Uh,
Okay.
this is a very, I mean, great kind of like action scenes. I think the monster designs and the robot designs are pretty cool. The main kind of draw here is the father-daughter relationship between a absolutely brilliant child and her father, who's just trying his best, but like is really struggling.
Hmm.
That side of it is cute. The adventure kind of hook is cute as well. Yeah, and visually, it's okay. Like it's not great or anything of the sort, but I am enjoying like the little bit of father daughter story that's going on here. So that wraps
Nice.
up my anime corner. Please feel free to go check those out. I do think that all the returning anime this season has a lot of good stuff. Um,
Hmm.
that you can go back and watch the first season and kind of dive back into. My top three picks again are Takt Op Destiny, this season's version of Vivi, Heike Monotagari. You have to watch just because it is a visual marvel, and
Mm.
Ousama Ranking, which might be one of the best stories that we've had this year. In
Nice.
general, yeah.
No, awesome. And that wraps it up for ISIS Enemy Corner for this month. Wealth of options for you to delve into.
Oh yeah.
Obviously the top three that he specifically spotlighted should be your priority and mine. And I'm definitely gonna delve into Osama Ranking for sure,
Yeah.
since that's his topic. To wrap this episode up of genre equality, I'm going to be talking about the pull list, which is where I recommend one or two reading recommendations to
Hmm.
you guys. First up, I'm going to be talking about A Psalm for the Wild Built.
Uh-huh.
It is okay. Before I get into this book, uh, let me talk about its wonderful author, Becky Chambers,
Hmm.
who is right now my favorite sci-fi author. Um,
Oh.
and here's the reason: I read a lot of sci-fi, and it's a genre that's become overpopulated with cynicism and grimness and
Hmm.
violence,
Hmm.
and whether it's alien invasions or technology gone wrong or the ravages of climate change. I mean, the tone is depressing despite most of the stories presenting quite valid allegories and cautionary tales. But increasingly, the quote unquote hope punk genre seems to be slowly counteracting this. It's
Mm.
a subgenre built upon kindness and decency and integrity. It's a hopeful view of what people can be. Think sci-fi Paddington, sci-fi Ted Lasso, that kind of thing.
Okay. Okay.
Uh, it inspires goodness rather than caution against badness, and at the forefront of this subgenre, like the leader of it, is Becky Chambers. And as I've reviewed in previous episodes, like the Wayfarer series, her Wayfarer series is the best example of these.
Hmm.
Her latest is a novella called The Sum for the Wild Built. It takes place in a new continuity outside of the Wayfarer's universe,
Hmm.
but shares much of his DNA. Essentially, the story is a monk and a robot meet in a forest. They become they become
Yeah.
friends, and they spend lots of time talking about stuff. What follows is a quiet, gentle book made up of episodic conversations between the monk and the robot, as they travel through the wilderness and discuss the differences between robot and human societies. They debate about history and ecology and philosophy and desire and purpose. Not only are the conversations great, they're great in philosophy, and they're also great at sneaky world building, because all of the stuff that you need to know about the world is implied in their conversations.
Mhm.
They are intensely character driven, addressing the insecurities and troubles of each character in very eloquent ways. And as they go along, they not only understand each other but pick up on new perspectives, and their friendship becomes a source of strength and comfort. It's a
Mhm.
cozy, wholesome, beautiful book that will leave you with warm, fuzzy feelings inside. So yeah, if
Ooh.
you like Paddington, if you like Ted Lasso, check out Becky Chambers' work, including her latest novella, A Sum for the Wild Built. Finally, I want to talk about Daytripper, which is let me say, some stuff I reviewed long overdue. A
Yeah.
few months later, a few weeks later.
Yeah.
Daytripper came out in 2011, so this
Oh
is 10
wow.
years
A
overdue.
decade later? Sure, sure. By
Yeah,
all
yeah.
means, man.
Like, I can't believe it took me this long to read Fábio Moon and Gabriel Bar's graphic novel Daytripper 10 years ago. And this is one of the most poignant and quietly profound things I've ever read. I admit I'm late, but better late than never.
Oh yeah.
The story of Daytripper follows the life of Brazilian man named Brás, who works as an obituary editor at a local newspaper. So
Okay.
he spends most of his time writing about the lives of people who have recently passed away, while trying to make a name of himself as a novelist. So on the side, he's trying to write his own novel. In each chapter, Brass takes us through a different segment of his life,
Mhm.
whether it be his childhood, playing with his cousins on a farm, or the time he met his future wife. So each chapter, whether it's him as a kid, him as a young adult, him as a middle-aged man, or an old man, or every age in between, offers you a glimpse into a pivotal moment of his life.
Mm.
The thing is, at the end of every chapter, he dies. So you follow his story as a middle-aged man in the first chapter.
Yep.
At the end of it, he dies.
Mhm.
And then at the second chapter, as a kid, he dies at the end of it. So we see how his life would be different if he had been cut short or gone
Mm.
on a little longer.
Mhm.
So slowly we piece together what defines Brass as a person through his experiences as a writer, a friend, a boyfriend, a husband, a son, and a father. So depending on where or when he is in his life, his
Yeah.
outlook of his fortunes and misfortunes are entirely different.
Mm.
Part of it is down to maturity, part of it is down to lack of maturity,
Mhm.
and part of it is down to the status of his relationships with the people around him at that time.
Mm.
So keep in mind, at different points of his life, the status of relationships obviously change. As we learn more about him, new revelations of past or future events ask the reader to continually reevaluate moments that we've previously read, while the story itself builds upon its examinations of family and friendship
Yeah.
and love and life. And from the moment the first issue opens with Brass's work writing obituaries, you kind of know that it's an examination of the inevitability of death
Mhm.
and the preparation of death, and how no amount of preparation is enough for those left behind. This was such a raw and human story about an ordinary person's hopes and fears, and despite it being about death, is ultimately a celebration of life and a hopeful meditation on the possibility uh, of life and of human nature.
Mm.
Yeah, this is one of the best comic books I've read in recent memory, and I don't know why it took me 10 years to catch up on it, but I borrowed it on a whim in the library, and hey, really enjoyed it. So I urge you to pick it up as well. It's available in the National Library. Or if you want to own it, go to Kino, go to Book Depository, or go to Amazon. Wherever you buy your comics, it's probably going to be there still.
Mm.
We will be back in a couple of weeks to talk about our favorite, well, our best new TV shows of the year.
Yeah.
So best new shows, season ones. We'll be talking about the best new shows of the year in the next Behold, as well as the best films from the second half of 2021. Because if you remember, we already did our list for the best films for the first half of
Yep.
2021. So we'll be rounding it up with the best of the second half. Plus, Drama and Equality rounds up the year 2021 with probably the biggest episode that we'll ever do. Uh, we have Spider-Man No Way Home coming.
Yeah.
We have Hawkeye coming. We got The Matrix Resurrections. We'll be reviewing The Wheel of Time. Agretsuko will be back. Isa will be covering The Witcher.
Mhm.
And lots and lots of good stuff there. So it's going to be a jam-packed final episode for the year, which we'll be listening. Which, I mean, I guess we'll be recording before the end of the year, but you
Yep.
will get it on the 1st of 2022. Of all those things, obviously Spider-Man No Way Home is number one on the list, right?
Hmm.
But beyond that, what else are you looking to talk about?
Uh,
Either on genre or on Behold.
ooh, okay. Let's see. Let's see. Okay, I'm looking forward to watching Hacks and Ghost Five Ever, for
Mm-hmm.
sure. Those two are definitely. I'm very curious to see where they take Witcher season two. I'm very interested to see Wheel of Time, for sure. I think like those are kind of like the upcoming things that I'm most excited about at the moment.
Okay, I'm assigning you Wheel of Time
Okay.
because I watched the first couple episodes. I don't want to watch it.
Okay. Okay.
um,
Cool.
I'm leaving that to you.
Yeah, I will. I will trudge through as much of it as I can.
Yeah, yeah. Try at least try to watch the first three and then give your review on that because
Yeah.
I lost hope already. I gave up
Oh
already.
wow. Okay. Yeah, that
Yeah.
does not bode well. Never mind. I'll give it 3 episodes, and then we can shit on it if we need to.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. I'm conflicted about Matrix. I'm really conflicted about Matrix. I don't know. I've loved the Matrix for like as a child.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know where this is going. I'm not sure if I'm gonna like it. I'm not sure if
Mm,
yeah. We will see how that goes. That's the one I'm most apprehensive about, I think.
sweet. Okay. Yeah. So you get our year-end list coming soon on the next two episodes of Behold,
Mm-hmm.
as well as the wrap-up of all the big blockbusters coming out in December very soon. Till next time, though. This has been Hidzir.
I'm Isa.
Goodbye,
Ciao.
guys.